Hi, I'm Katrina Blowers from 7 News. It's so great to be with you again, and I'm joined by parenting expert and the founder of the highly acclaimed Triple P Parenting Program, Professor Matt Sanders. Hello, Matt.
Hi, Katrina. Nice to be here.
Now, Matt, today we are going to talk about a very common experience for many Australian families, and that is sharing parenting roles or co-parenting across households. Now, this is not the easiest thing to do outside of a pandemic, and it's even more challenging for many people right now.
It certainly is. And if you think that many families have been struggling to actually get agreements around how you handle things between households, and a lot of those arrangements potentially have been disrupted, and that in a world where people are feeling unsettled and anxious about the whole situation, it's not surprising that some of the arrangements you think were pretty well established are now not possible to carry out. Children need certainty, and they need predictability. They need a safe harbour to be in, and you can have multiple safe harbours, but if you're in a rocky sort of scenario and there's a lot of friction and conflict going on between households, it's so much more difficult for children to deal with whatever's worrying them.
What is it in particular in this health crisis that children need across that co-parenting environment to thrive right now?
They need to see their parents are in control. They need to see their parents being calm and reassuring and dealing with whatever worries or anxieties that they have in a positive solution-focused way.
So I'm a mum of Malachi, Tali and Hamilton. They're 9, 8 and nearly 4. And they are to my ex-husband, and we did have a 50-50 arrangement for caring for them. But since COVID came, it threw things a little bit out.
Come on.
He's our nurse, so he's an essential worker, and he's been on the front line the whole time, doing early shifts that start at 6 a.m. and sometimes late shifts that don't finish till 2 a.m. So we've had to be pretty flexible in terms of custody with the children over this period. Then Mother Bear said, "Now who's the sleepiest? Who will be next?" Just communication, and I guess being open-minded that he is out there working, and that they're his children and he's doing the best he can to see them when he has a chance.
Now, I know that you are a big fan of routines for children, and we've briefly touched on that so far, but how do we actually maintain that routine when children are coming and going between the homes, particularly at a time when the rules keep changing?
Yeah, I think it's our job as a parent to try to minimise the number of changes that children are having to deal with at any one time. And that if you think about a daily routine that you might have in your own household, that's what you've got control over. And if you can have as much predictability from one day to the next in your own household, at least that part of the child's life has certainty and predictability. It doesn't mean that kids can't handle multiple different routines, so things can be slightly different if they're in another household. But the important thing is that focus on those things that you can directly influence yourself when you're with the child.
So Matt, a challenge for a lot of co-parents is talking to your children about what's going on in the other house. I guess, how do you do that in a way that's not judgmental, and why is it important to not be judgmental about these things?
First thing I'd say is just listen to what kids are telling you and prepared to share with you about their experience in the other household. And don't be too judgmental or critical about it, because if you get into an interrogation or cross-examination situation with children, they'll quickly learn either to edit what they were going to share with you anyway and tell you what you want to hear, because they know it either upsets you or that puts the other parent in a bad light. So
have a conversation or a discussion, but don't be too probing in the questions you're asking. Is that what you're saying?
I'm definitely saying that. It's just really important that children get a message that you have confidence that the other parent is able to deal with the situations that confront them, and it's their responsibility to do so. And your primary responsibility as a parent is what's happening with you in your household.
Well, Matt, when we come back, we are going to be talking about some more ideas for smoother shared parenting, particularly if opinions start to clash. Welcome back. Well, we're talking about the issue of caring for kids across multiple households, either due to separation, divorce, or other arrangements. Joining us now is Professor Daryl Higgins. He's an expert in child safety, family function, and prevention of child abuse from the Australian Catholic University. Great to have you with us, Daryl.
Thanks, it's a real pleasure to be with you today.
Well, Daryl, co-parenting can include tension and disagreement, and I have no doubt that that's intensified during this health crisis. How do we protect kids from the fallout?
I think one of the most important things is that we need to remember that talking is really the most important ingredient here. And while, of course, we are socially distant from one another, that doesn't mean that parents are let off the hook. In fact, it's even more important to try and talk face-to-face if possible, but via, video link or via telephone. But, face-to-face is really important to be able to pick up on those concerns that the other person may have about the parenting context.
Yeah, no, that works fine. No worries. Okay, well, I'll let you go and I'll make sure they've got everything ready for Monday afternoon then. Okay, see you, bye. There's times where there's tension. There's times where there's, a little bit of frustration, I think, on both parts. But we generally try to be very amicable, very laid back, very open about it, understanding of each other's sort of circumstances. And I think it took a lot to get there, but we're there, so it's nice. I think it's very important, especially for Tali has anxiety. What are you putting in your bag for Dad's house?
I'm going to put my phone in.
Yeah, good job. Just to see that, that Dad and I are okay, and that she doesn't have to choose a parent. She doesn't have to, when she's with Dad, she doesn't have to not talk about me, or, when they're with me, they can talk about Dad, they can talk about what they do at Dad's. There's no hostility there about what they do. There's no judgmenting on all, about what Dad's doing over there with them or anything like that. And I know that when I'm sending my 3 off, that they're going there happy, they're going there knowing that Mum's okay, they're going over there knowing Dad's okay, and then they're going over there knowing that they're okay.
We've talked about face-to-face contact, and sometimes separations can include some animosity, but how important is it to overlook that and practice kindness?
Yeah, look, kindness is actually one of those really critical ingredients, not only because it's likely to get the best out of that interaction with co-parents, but also it's about modelling to children how you expect them to behave with others. And so that really is, setting the groundwork for interpersonal relationships going forward, but it's even more important now. And so being able to kind of practice kindness, and a way of doing that is to find the positives, particularly if there are tensions between 2 households around how things are done, to be able to acknowledge what's good about what another parent might be doing is a really important way of then leading into a discussion perhaps around a concern that you might have that you want to share and talk through, and then be able to come back again to another positive. So that kind of praise sandwich, of course, is what we often teach parents to do with their children. We also need to be thinking about how we do it with the parents that we might be co-parenting with across households.
I think that's going to take quite a lot of mindfulness and maturity too, won't it?
It does, and it involves empathy. It involves being able to put yourself in the shoes of the other person. And of course, in this context where we're actually, as a community, being asked to manage and contain a really significant risk, being able to have those really open and frank discussions, but also put yourself in the shoes of the other parent around their perspective on risk is really important to be able to then open up that discussion around what that means for children who are spending time across 2 different households.
And Matt, from a child's perspective, how important is it for children to see adults behave in a kind and respectful manner?
I think it's extremely important because children learn a lot about how you deal with conflict by watching the way in which their parents manage it. And when they see parents engaged in the blame game and, accusing and thinking the worst and jumping to conclusions about what the other person is wanting and thinking sometimes, it's really not good for kids to see this, because often the disagreement won't be resolved.
Well, stay with us, because after the break we're going to have some tips on how co-parents can work as a team.
Okay, let's go get ready to pack your bag for Dad's. Tali, can you go get the things you want to go? Go and get the things you need.
Welcome back. You're with us on Parenting in a Pandemic. We have parenting expert Matt Sanders, and we're also joined by child safety experts Daryl Higgins. Now, Matt and Daryl, if we are part of a co-parenting arrangement, I have a confession, I'm part of a co-parenting arrangement myself. How do we best work as a team? We might begin with you, Daryl.
Yeah, look, I think the most important thing is to be open to creating new routines. We know from a whole heap of research on parenting that children do best when parents are able to set a routine. But what does that mean when you're sharing care across multiple households? In the context of a pandemic, we're creating new routines anyway. And children are remarkably adaptable. And so if that means that there are two slightly different routines in household A and household B, I think we can be open to that. But parents need to be sharing that information with each other about the kinds of routines that they've been establishing. And then other parents can be thinking about that and preparing their children. For example, when there's a handover arrangement and children are moving from one household to the next, that they can anticipate what some of those rules or routines might be that they're going to be finding in that other household.
It only really changes on weekends. Through the school week, it's pretty much the same both houses. We do co-parent on those grounds as well, just to keep it consistent. Their dad's in tune with them enough to know what works and what doesn't. So, Hamilton, you ready to take a lucky dip? I've just implemented a lucky dip box, for example, so they do jobs to obtain themselves a lucky dip. So that communication will be passed on to him. Whether he implements that or not is 100% his choice. And what are you gonna get? Lollipops and books, yay!
Sometimes it can be tricky to get that consistency across multiple households. Matt, I might ask you, how much variation is okay for kids to cope with?
I think the most important issue is whether within the same household there's predictability and certainty, because as a parent you can actually only control your own parenting. You're not in a position of really controlling what's going on in another household. For example, if they're staying with their grandparents or the other parent, kids work out that there are slightly different rules that operate in different places, and they learn that right throughout their schooling.
Daryl, is this a time when we as parents, particularly those of us in co-parenting arrangements, just have to be nimble?
Absolutely. That flexibility is really important. And being able to see the good in what the other parent is trying to do and acknowledge that, and to recognise that in most instances, parents are coming to this task with the best interests of children at heart. But there are some really practical things that we need to be thinking about. We have public health messaging that tells us about the importance of hygiene, including hand hygiene. And one household may be a real fan of using soap and water and may, encourage singing happy birthday or something that lasts for 20 seconds, whereas another household may be using hand sanitizer. And kids can often get confused if we don't explain to them that there's this overarching narrative that is, we have to keep our hands clean. That's the important message. And so to be able to be respectful of another household's approach to that overarching theme, I think is really critical at this time.
Daryl, I'll ask you about some concerns some friends of mine have had where across the different households there have been different rules. So say one parent might be stricter with hygiene and social distancing measures than the other. That can lead to tension. How do we navigate that?
Yeah, look, I think it is really difficult The most important message, as I said before, is I think it's important for parents to communicate with each other. We know that there's an incredible variety of responses that individuals and families have to the requirements of social distancing, what that actually means in practice, about how we sit, in our household, when we interact with other family members, how many. So I think we're fine as long as we recognise that we create a routine for our household and be respectful of what goes on in other households and not try and undermine that and inadvertently say the other parent's got it wrong and they're not doing as good a job as me.
What do you think about that, Matt?
I think it's very important what Daryl's saying there, because if you get into blaming and accusation and constantly criticising in the child's presence the other parent who's involved, it's very, very confusing for children, and it's really unhelpful, because what it means is that you're holding on to all of this acrimony and bitterness and anger, so you can't actually relax around your kids anyway.
It was hard at first, only because, entering co-parenting arrangements to start with aren't always easy, because there's generally one parent that's quite hostile, but we overcame that a while ago. And I think for me, it's been a lot easier because I've let go of that, and I've looked at the children's best interests, and I've said they need this and they deserve this. And he's a fantastic dad, so just because their parents aren't together doesn't mean that we can't still work together for their interest.
Daryl, a lot of people are talking about how our children are going to look back on this time. Is that sort of a good litmus test to think about how will your children think about this time when they're adults?
Absolutely. Children have memories like elephants. Would you want a video recording of the way in which you've interacted with their other parents to be played back, at their 21st birthday? And if you can hold your head high and say, I'm proud of how I conducted myself, then I think that's a really good litmus test.
Oh, thank you so much, Daryl, for all of your insights, and you, Matt, too. And I'm sure they'll be of help for many co-parents who are sharing the load together the best they can right now. Thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Well, stay with us, because after the break, Matt is going to give us some self-care suggestions for single parents.
Can you give Mummy a hug? I love you.
Welcome back. Well, we're talking about co-parenting, and Matt, there's no doubt that single mums and dads definitely do a mighty job, but how can they get some time out for themselves right now? And what is the importance, I suppose, during this pandemic of taking time for self-care?
I think the important issue is that if you don't look after yourself, it's very difficult to take care of your children in the way you'd like to. And so if you think about your own needs for support, it means that a parent who's doing it pretty much solo needs to be exploring what avenues of support might be available to them through friendships or extended family or others involved in their social world, because you can be a single parent and still have a good social support network. In fact, there are some couples who have less social support than single parents at times. And I think the thing to remember is that when your children are with someone else, that's a little bit of time to recharge your batteries and to do a little bit of that self-caring activity that is so important in terms of our own resilience and capacity to deal with what's in front of us.
How open can you be with your children about needing to take a bit of a break? Can you say to them, listen, I've been parenting all day, mum needs some time out to read a book for 20 minutes?
Yeah, I think it's important in explaining to children and adults the need to do something that you're also concurrently thinking about, how do I set my youngster up to be doing something that doesn't require them to be with me or require my attentions.
All right, you want to play by yourself for a little bit? Yeah, okay, you have fun.
And what's this?
It's a frog. All right, see you soon.
It's always tempting to say, look, I'm just going to tell them that I need to have a break and need to do something, but unless you take some notice of what the children are doing, you can end up having a very disrupted time and trying to relax because the kids are fighting, they don't have anything to do, and they come searching for you, you know, mum, 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 and trying to basically prevent you doing that yoga lesson or doing that thing that you are hoping to do as self-care. So unfortunately, it's not ever a situation of just simply cutting the children off so you can take care of yourself. It's almost like, let's take care of the kids first, keep them busy, keep them involved, now I'll take time to look after myself.
Now, we have been discussing tension between co-parents, and that is one thing, but when parents have significant concerns about the safety of their child or children when they go to the other parent's home, what should parents do then?
I think it's important in that sort of situation to consider seeking support from your local family relationship centre, to have an opportunity to talk to someone about the issues that you're concerned about and the safety concerns in particular that you're worried about. If you're seriously concerned about your child or your own personal safety in a situation, then always take action. Be prepared to contact the police or Child Protective Services so that you're not dealing with this issue completely on your own, and it is a safety issue that requires action.
And there is always help available, and we'll have all those resources online. Well, thank you so much, Matt, again for joining us this week.
Thank you, Katrina.
If you'd like to revisit any of the information that we've discussed today, you can discover even more tips and advice. You can head to the resources website on screen. I'll be back with Matt again next week for more parenting in a pandemic. Until then, stay safe and stay well.